Greetings, everyone. Biracial Blerd, MultiethnicMastery here, doing something very different. I know I usually have podcasts. I know I have some video game footage. I know I have some writing. But I was like, let me do a quick video and combine everything. And I know it's just me, and I'm not doing all this crazy fancy video editing, which I think I only have video game footage enough to actually do that. But yeah, so basically, I'm going to try something different. I didn't want to podcast this ever, actually. This wasn't something I wanted to because I felt I had to write it out more. And I might still actually do that in terms of all this content. But what I wanted to do is introduce 5 black authors. And while one, I would say, is more a book, I would say, rather than an author. But I'd say 5 influential authors, black authors, who kind of shaped my view in terms of what I like to read, in terms of novels and those ideas along that. But yeah, so let's go through this. It should be interesting. James Baldwin, Fire Next Time. And this book is pretty interesting in that James Baldwin is scathingly critical of America. When is he not? But it's more in an essay format. And while he has some good books, and my favorite of his is actually Go Tell It on the Mountain, and I really enjoyed I Am Not Your Negro, the documentary for James Baldwin. I think my favorite thing about James Baldwin is his brutal honesty of the condition of being black in America. He doesn't ever shy away from it, and he definitely had to get away going to Europe. I mean, heck, I might even do that sometime. But I think what's important to note with James Baldwin in particular is that he really knows how to explain himself. If you've ever seen some of his speeches, he's very eloquent in explaining how there are certain issues with black and white in particular. I mean, you could say other ethnicities, of course, as well. In particular, and these issues are just so flagrant in America, and he calls attention to it all the time, and it's really nuanced how he does it, and just amazing work as a whole. And while I like a lot of his fictional works a bit more than his non-fiction works, and in general I tend to like fiction more than non-fiction, non-fiction reminds me of the horror that we live in here. So yeah, a bit more political here on this one than I usually am. But yeah, wanted to explain that because I think he's fantastic, and also being a gay black man, he's got some very interesting perspectives as well. Let's continue. And in this case, this is the book and the author being highly influential for me. So, Octavia Butler's Kindred, which is also in graphic novel format. I definitely have to get that sometime. But Octavia Butler is fantastic because she's a very influential black sci-fi writer, has been writing for decades, long time, and a lot of her work is in the process of getting adapted nowadays, so I think that's really important, and actually her work should have been adapted ages ago. I know Wild Seed's currently on there, and I definitely need to check it out. There's also Parable of the Sower, which is a really good one, probably my favorite of hers, and that's kind of post-apocalyptic. Then we've got Lula's Brood, which is far-flung future, and highly conceptual, but also goes into some grassroots ideas. And I know Fledgling is a popular one as well for those of her fans of her vampire work, which I am not. I am not a fan of vampires. Yep, you heard it. It doesn't usually appeal to me. Not my jam. But Kindred, very fascinating book going about how a black lady goes back into her ancestors' past, yes, during slavery times, and deals with that. And there's interesting things. It's not just like, yes, the slavery issue, but there's stuff about like general health care, general thinking around certain abilities and what people can and can't do, and the lack of electricity and things of that nature. Just stuff that you don't always think about when you think of like a past setting. And it's fantastic, highly gripping, brutal, great writing, and that she's very good at being descriptive and getting your characters down packed, but also keeping their personality grounded in places that are totally different. And I think that's the strength of her sci-fi, is a lot of her characters are very realistic, but a lot of her settings are unrealistic, and I think that contrast works really well for her. Going down the line, we've got Toni Morrison. This is The Bluest Eye, one of the saddest books around. It's horrifying what happens to Piccola in terms of dark skin and her natural hair and everything, and I think why this is important is, I would say, before the next author I explain, and before Octavia Butler, Toni Morrison's books, and definitely Song of Solomon, and Beloved in a sense, kind of got me a sense of when you start to read people's perspectives more frequently, you start to kind of think, or at least understand their thinking a bit more. I think many of us grew up reading white men for classical literature and thinking that they had the greatest stuff and thinking high approvals of all of that. But I don't think that's the case as much now. And I think reading black women, I mean, as the last person and this person and the next person, and actually the author of the next book, are all black women, you really get a sense of black women's thinking, and your mindset begins to shift in terms of your understanding as a whole. And I think that's very important in terms of what you're reading, right? If you mainly read certain authors, you're going to have these certain viewpoints and you stay limited, which is probably what happens with a lot of people in our society. Versus if you start branching out, like I've read books by Indian authors, I've read books by Chinese authors, I've read books by South American authors and Mexican authors, and go on and on and on. And all of these people have very different perspectives that really shape how you are. And I think Toni Morrison does a great job of magical realism. And a lot of her books, you're like, would that be possible? Is that possible? Maybe magic, maybe mundane. A lot of that goes on within Toni Morrison's books, but it's a lot of fun in terms of her concepts. However, her subject matter is often very much black women's struggles and the nonsense they have to deal with, and particularly in general as a black woman in America, as many of her books are not set in modern times, but also as a black woman dealing with a lot of black men. Many of the black men in her books are in various degrees of help and not helping. So, for instance, in Sula, I can say the black men are not that great at all. I can say in Beloved, one of the black men tries, but it's not as effective. I can say Song of Solomon, the black men are pretty not that great. Even though in a rare version, she actually focuses on a black male protagonist in Song of Solomon instead of her usual black woman protagonist. And her books are very tough, and I understand if you don't want to always read them because they are very rough readings in terms of black women's experiences. But at the same time, they're heavily doused in fiction, and they've got the magical realism sense with them. Moving along, Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Or probably hope I said that name right. I think Americana was really solidified me wanting to read black authors only, and particularly black women, because this book is so great at explaining the diaspora of an African person in modern times. While you may have seen African immigrants in some of those ideas, or specifically African books, she does a great job of writing about the diaspora being African coming to America and African coming to England, which is often where you have a lot of different Africans. You have African Americans or African British, and all of those nuances that come with that, and how that's, she even has her character interact with African Americans, and those differences arise, like how different it is to be black and born in America versus being African and coming to America. And there's a lot of these great nuances she does with her blog writing within the story that kind of analyzes her perspective in great detail of being an African woman in America. And I think that's very crucial in understanding these thinking and processes, and kind of really solidified some of my shifting in the wonders of black women as a whole. And this is definitely one of my favorite novels of all time, probably top 5. And I can't think of a better novel, at least introductory. I mean, I think some of the other novels I've mentioned, some of the other novels I've talked about, and authors have books that go more in depth in terms of black women. But I think this one is really great at accessibility because it is a highly engaging read. Chimamanda is very engaging with her writing and keeping events interesting, and there's always something happening within every chapter and a different nuance, a different perspective, but it also really clues you into black women, and often why so many of us do not understand them and their wonderful greatness. And Chimamanda highlights that highly in Americana, and fantastic book, very influential author, totally shifts my thinking. To end, we're going to talk about Ytasha Womack's, hope I said her name right, Afrofuturism. Now, Womack doesn't have tons of novels and like my other authors I've discussed. I think what's so important is this book, Afrofuturism. This is my personal favorite genre in existence. This is more than Afro-punk, and I like Afro-punk if done right. More than African fantasy and a lot of different other concepts. Afrofuturism. I love sci-fi a lot, and mixing blackness and African culture with sci-fi is a match made in heaven for me. And with that being said, she highlights a lot of different concepts and ideas of Afrofuturism, and there's tons of stuff, as you can see from these pages. I kind of ended up dog-eared at the bottom, means I need to reference that. And all this Afrofuturism I was able to look up and find a bunch of novels. There's about 3 or so back there that I have, and while I think some of them geared towards African fantasy versus Afrofuturism, I was able to find some Afrofuturistic stuff from maybe Nyeri Okorafor's Binti. And I highly recommend this book in order just to give you a sense of what Afrofuturism is. This is also, I found Octavia Butler, by the way. So a ton of Afrofuturism ideas and readings have come from here. I mean, look at the cover even. It's just fantastic. It's an African woman with sci-fi and cybernetic dreads and everything. It's just too cool. But those are 5 novels / authors that have been highly influential for me from a black perspective, and I hope you check them out. And have a good day, everybody.